Good afternoon. In this video, I'm going to do a few things. I looked at some data. So let me just take a step back. So for next week's class on March 30th, we're going to dive into the summary statistics portion in SAS, which involves writing procedures and that sort of thing in SAS. The data set I used here was something that I output straight from R. And so what I wanted to do was kind of look for a data set that spoke more directly to finance students. So what I did was I went to NASDAQ.com, and they actually have, if you go to like quotes and NASDAQ companies. What I did was essentially I just downloaded this list. So there are 3,462 companies listed on the NASDAQ exchange, and so we're essentially going to be working with this data that we could that we retrieved from NASDAQ. That data would have been current probably as of March 22nd, market close. So we'll read that into SAS, and then we'll explore it a little bit, and then run some summary statistics on that. So I went ahead and downloaded it. It downloads as a CSV. You can kind of see the file here. And I went ahead and put it on my desktop in a folder called SAS_data. And so I'm going to work out a SAS desktop for now. And with the videos I've given, you should be comfortable working in either, although you probably only worked in one up to this point. But I'm gonna work in this for this particular video because this interface and this kind of thing is probably more likely what you'll see, on the job versus the cloud-based version. So in the libraries, I created a couple different ones, and now I'm failing to remember where those libraries actually are located. So if you right-click on the icon, you can go to properties. So what I did first, this would be how SAS starts up. Double-click on libraries, and then you can right-click on bana6043, and you can see, and then select properties, and you can see that the location is not the SAS dash data folder that I have on my desktop, so this isn't the one that I want to use. Instead, it's this SPR19, which is shorthand for spring 2019. When I look at that library, it's got the path that I want. So if I go to that folder on my desktop, you can see I have this data set called company list. So this is what, by default, it was named when I downloaded it from NASDAQ. If you open it up in Excel, you can see some of the values for the data. So it has the last sale, which is probably the last sale price, I would guess. Then it has its market cap, sector, also IPO year, and then quotes the NASDAQ website, and then also the ticker symbol. So what I'm going to do is read this into SAS. You should be familiar with this method for desktop. I used the video. If not, go back to the video where I refer to or demonstrate how to import. We're going to do that quickly here. So we're going to import the data. It's a CSV file. So we'll select that. Go to next. We'll tell it where it's located. So in this particular instance, it's in the SAS data folder, and it's company list. Next. The library we want to store it in is SPR19, and we'll just call it, I'll just call it NASDAQ, and then we'll go to next. And this part again, SAS will output the code that generates the import if you should want to use it again. I'm not going to, so I'll hit finish. It'll read some stuff in, and so what we're going to do is just take a look at the log first. So here is essentially what SAS is telling you as it ran it in, and it does generate the code here. You can kind of see the code that ended up ended up generating, essentially importing the data. This is number of names found is less than number of variables found. Might be an issue. I'm not 100% sure what that's referring to, but we'll take a look. The whole point of me doing this was kind of to do it on the fly to see what kind of issues might arise. So if we go down, this would just be the code in black, and then blue is going to be your notes or your progress. So it tells you that 3,462 records were read in. The minimum record length was 90. And the data set has the 3,462 rows, and it has 10 variables. And the data statement was used in order to create it. And so if we go in here, it says it was successfully created. So if we go into our library, we can see that it exists. We can also use in SAS Desktop, and I'm pretty sure SAS On Demand has the same feature, but if we double click on the actual SAS data set, so first let me show that this is a SAS data set. So if we go to properties, basically everything that you're going to see within SAS is a SAS data set, but you can see when it was created, modified, there are details, the specific columns. So here you can see that we have our column names. So if we look at the way the data came out, company list, then on the right, put this on the right as well. You can see that we have symbol, name, last sale, market cap, ADR, TSO, IPO year, sector, industry, summary quote, and for some reason it's reading in data that's here, which means that there may be something there. What I'm going to do is expand these columns. I'll go over to column J, which would be your 10th column. I'll see if there's anything in there. It doesn't look like it. For some reason, SAS identified that this column had been edited and read it in as var 10, which is essentially 10th column. That the var 10 just is the default name for a column that doesn't have an actual name or a header. So everything looks pretty good here from what I'm seeing for the properties, and then we'll expand out. So there's that option to kind of view the properties. You can view in Excel, it appears. What I'm going to do is just simply open it, which you can double click on it. And so here you have access to SAS's kind of like spreadsheet viewer. So this gives you a view of the data, all 3,000 rows. Everything looks generally pretty good, right? So what we're going to do now is actually write our first SAS procedure. So I know you've seen these in class, but we're just actually going to write one now. So what we're going to use is something called proc contents, which is pretty similar to what we were showing here with the properties. So in SAS, you either have high level. You only have a proc step or a data step. Proc steps is to run procedures on data. So this could be running summary statistics. This could be producing a graph on the data. And then you have your data steps, which are really about manipulating data, copying data, merging data, etc. So for what we'll see, most of the class will be some proc, mostly proc steps, but we will do some data manipulation in SAS as well. So every procedure starts with the word proc, and then we'll use contents, and then we'll specify the data option. So we're going to tell it what data to use. So remember, the convention is first your library, followed by a period, and then your data set. So we specify we want that data set, and this is all that we need for a SAS for the proc content statement. So remember, every statement ends in a semicolon, and then also after every proc step or data step, you also want the run statement, which also ends with a semicolon. So here again, the important parts, especially for a permanent library, you need to refer to it at all times with a period and then the data set. If we were simply to leave this portion off, SAS would assume that it's the NASDAQ data set is located in the work library. So if I were to run this, this would actually generate an error because there should be no data set there. So if I run it, it's running, and it tells us file work.nasdaq does not exist. So it was looking in the work library, the temporary library. So that's the default library. So we need to specify that it's actually in the Spring 19. And before I run this, I do want to hop over to the SAS actual documentation. So if we type in SAS, usually I just type in SAS proc contents, whatever procedure you're doing, and then I usually type in 9.4, which is the most recent version of SAS, and that's to kind of ensure that you're, for the top result for Google, you're receiving the most up-to-date documentation, because there are other documentation out there for different versions of SAS. So when we look at the documentation provided by SAS, this is pretty much what you're going to get from SAS for everything. The nice thing is it's always standard, so the documentation is always going to kind of look this way. So you have your overview. The syntax is the part I wanted to point out. So we see proc contents, and then what follows it are options, right? So if we click on this options link, it's going to actually take us to a list of the optional arguments. So if you see here, the first is centile, so this is always in alphabetical order. Data equals, this specifies an entire library or a specific SAS data set within a library. This tells you what kind of forms it can take. I will say the default here, so this doesn't have to be provided. However, the default is always the most recently created data set in your job or session. So had we run it without the data set, because we had without the data option here, so just like this, it's actually gonna run on that data, because that was the one we just most recently created. That's not always going to be the case. So it's best practice to specify the data option with every procedure, every data step you're doing. It helps yourself recognize which data set is actually being used in the procedure, and then it helps anyone who might inherit your code down the line. So we'll again put that in. So we have our SAS statement here. Remember, there's a few things I want to point out. Every SAS statement ends in a semicolon. SAS does not care what you capitalize or do not capitalize. It is not case sensitive. And SAS statements can be on more than one line. They can also be broken. More than one statement can exist on a line. And then they can also, a single statement can also span multiple lines, as many as possible. So you can see here, if we run this, we're not going to have any issues. There's a couple different ways to run in SAS. Generally, you want to highlight the code you want to run. There's this little running person up here. That's also what is shown in SAS Studio. And then on SAS Desktop, your shortcut is F8. SAS On Demand is F3. So if I press F8, we're going to see the proc contents run. Let's go first to the log. It's always best practice to look at the log. So this is what we ran last time. And then it just tells us here's where we ran the code, and it no significant notes, warnings, or errors. So that's good. So with the contents procedure, you see a few things. You see the observation names, the number of the length, the number of observations in the data set, the number of variables, whether observations are deleted, whether the data are sorted, which is something we'll come to later, and then also some general information, its location, and then also this is probably the most important piece. So this is listed in alphabetical order. So you can see basically the data type for every variable. And we can see here, unfortunately, something like market cap, which we know is a numeric variable, was read in as a character variable. Essentially everything was too. There would be other numeric data such as last sale. IPO year would be a date, really. So you can see that generally SAS treated these as character values. And there's a reason for that. So if we go in to our Explorer and we open up the data again, you can see generally what SAS is going to do is it is going to read it's going to read a certain number of rows in order to basically make an assessment of what the data type is. So when you go down, for example, go down here, and you see this NA, this essentially is going to cause SAS to treat this column as a numeric variable, character, because this doesn't actually have a number representation. What SAS is really expecting here is a missing value, not an n/a, which doesn't really have any interpretation within SAS. So SAS doesn't know what that is at all, or what that means. Market cap, it looks like it's still reading in as a character data, although I haven't found out why. I'm assuming there's an NA somewhere, but I don't want to search forever for it. So we'll have to handle those differently. But for now, I'm going to just close this video to kind of show this is how you start to import a data set, and then also bring it in and explore some of its features using proc contents. We can also, I guess before I close the video, also show the proc print, that procedure. So I'm going to close the output window. So proc contents tells you about the data. You can obviously view the data here, up here, but you also have the option to print the data to the output window. So if I were to just use print, I'm gonna use this one. If I were to just use print, what it's going to try to do is output all 3,462 observations, which I don't think that's a whole lot for SAS. It's a significant amount. I'll run it and see how long it lasts. Hopefully not too long. I shouldn't have spoke before testing it. It's running now. So it didn't take too long for 3,000. Now when you get to 30,000, that will definitely hang up SAS. So you can see here we can see the data as we saw it before, but this is just output in SAS's output display format, which would be an HTML output. So I don't see anything specifically that's causing issues for this market cap column, but that doesn't mean that it's not there. So what I'm going to do also for the proc print is show you one other feature of SAS, and that is an option for an option. So for the data option within a procedure, you also have the option or the ability to use options on the data. One of those is to limit the number of observations that are actually used in the procedure. So the options for the data option are specified after the data set is given, and then they're within parentheses. So here we're going to use the obs option, and we're going to type equals, and then we're going to specify only print observation through observation 25 is what this means. So when we run this, you can see there were actually 3,462 observations the last time we ran print. We're going to run it again, and this time there should only be 25 that are output. So you can see there are 25 observations read. This will cut down on SAS computing time if you're trying to just test something first. So this is a great option for the data option for a procedure. So this is definitely one you should take note of. So with that, to kind of recap what we did in this video, imported data, kind of viewed it within the viewer, the data viewer or table viewer, and then also ran a contents procedure and a print procedure, reviewed SAS options, or procedure or statement options, such as the data option in this particular instance, and then options for an option, which is kind of the way SAS works. Which here we use the obs option, which means read basically the first 25 observations.